Arkush, the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the umbrella organization of British Jewry that has been around for over 250 years, 257 is it? Right. And we have Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm is a prominent activist for the Jewish state, the Jewish people, and the...
256 to be exact.
You've been around for 257.
Working?
This is on the air now.
This is for the camera, so... perhaps, Malcolm, could you explain a little bit about your organization?
I was going to ask you to do the same, but the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations is only 60 years old, and it's the umbrella of 53 national Jewish organizations which cover broadly the spectrum of American Jews and the American Jewish community that belong to an organization. Includes all the Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, the major organizations whose names you know, the alphabet of Jewish life, and it deals only in national and international issues. We do not deal with domestic and social issues per se.
Thanks. Now, my name is Limmud. I'm the Europe correspondent for JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and I'm based in the Netherlands. I cover Europe, which is why I asked Malcolm to headline his organizations, not my beat. Now, as our host, I would like to address the first question to you, Mr. Arkush. You're very diverse and accomplished and wonderful community is facing a huge change. You told us at a session yesterday, and you also mentioned that you won't be around to see that change, which made me wonder how you personally feel about the change that's coming. It's about the growth of Haredi communities that are projected to be at least half or the majority of British Jewry by the year 2050. How does that make you feel?
Well, the projection is that more than half the young people will be Haredi, but you give it a few years and it'll be half our community. Personally, I have absolutely no strong feelings either way. I think that we are seeing very similar societal changes in many Jewish communities. The Haredi proportion of the Israeli population, for example, will also be very substantial in the 2050s. My main concern is how will that affect the community's relationships with government, which are absolutely crucial to the functioning of our community. Because our community thrives because it is integrated without having lost our distinct separate identity, and because we can talk to government about the things that concern us, and we can do it in a fairly unified way despite our differences. And at the moment, the Haredim tend not to engage not only with the mainstream parts of the Jewish community, they're about 15% at the moment, but they don't engage very well with government either. And when they're interviewed on the media, which is also a pretty important part of communal functioning, they don't always come over terribly well. So those are my concerns. I'm also concerned about whether they will have a sufficient appreciation for the needs and the aspirations of the non-Haredi community, going from the so-called non-Orthodox right through to the secular. I'm not sure whether they'll even sometimes sit in a room with some people.
The Americans on the panel shouldn't feel too smug either. They're also facing a change in their communities. The same surveys that project 50% of young people in Britain project even greater. Intermarriage in the US, it was 25% 20 years ago. By now it's 58%, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Hoenlein, how do you, given that the intermarriage rate is rising, how sustainable is the future for American Jewry the way we know it now?
Well, the caveat is, as we know it now, I am optimistic about the future of American Jewry. I think we will remain a dynamic community. I have a different view about the Haredim. I think in America they have done very well in dealing with government. They are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their ability to work with Congress on a national level and on local levels. They've been exceedingly successful, certainly in the centers of their major population. And I think we see also a change in the Haredi community in Israel and elsewhere, where many more are beginning to go to school. They're learning. They're more in the army than ever before. I think there will be dynamic changes within the Haredi community forced by economic realities, and the dynamics of life will dictate some of those changes. As far as intermarriage, it is a big challenge, and I, for one, don't assume that the product of intermarriages will remain within the community. There has to be more done to reach out, but it can't be done when they're 18 and go for a week to Israel on birthright and think that that's going to save them. If you ignore them the first 17 years of their lives, it has to be a far greater and more creative approach to building a sense of Jewish pride, Jewish identity amongst young people. And frankly, if I were to invest, I would invest in those up to the age of 6. You know, the Catholic Church says, give me a kid till he's 6, you can have him the rest of their lives, because that does. And you will find very little positive literature and material if you want to educate young children, elementary school children, others, about Israel. We have not invested in our youth. I started a newsletter for high school students, and it was really remarkably well received about Israel, and I could not find anybody who would fund it because nobody cared. And the fact is that we're paying the price for the fact that we have not encouraged young people, young Jews, to identify in whatever way they can. I believe in the smorgasbord approach, that everybody should find something at the table that they like, that once you identify, once you bring them into the community, then they will find a broader expression. Young people are searching. They want to have, they feel the absence. I saw several books written recently about people regretting the fact that their parents did not give them a religious identity, and some of them were Jews. I find it that young people today are clamoring to be in the Jewish community. We have to provide opportunities on whatever grounds, in whatever way. I think Limmud here does it in the fact that you give them a broad array of cultural and other opportunities so that they can relate in whatever way they do. So we can sit and bemoan intermarriage, or we can look at how the community could function, allocate its funds more wisely, be more creative, give young people more of an opportunity to participate. They want the real thing. This is a Pepsi generation. They don't want fancy edifices. They want to see what the content is. They want to know, what does it mean to me, not what do I get out of it. They're not hedonistic in that sense, that they want to know, what does it mean? How do I relate to it? How does it fit the needs and aspirations that I have? So to me, the emphasis, and we have tried to do this in various ways, to reach out to college students, to young I proposed to Prime Minister Sharon at the time, and I propose it again, that we should have days in Israel where we invite young singles from all over the world to come together in Israel to meet each other. There are thousands of singles in countries here in Europe that will never meet a Jew if they don't have an opportunity. We have 1 million singles in America, 1 million singles in Israel. Give them opportunities, even if they leave and go and build Jewish lives elsewhere. We have to provide more opportunities, creative things that will enable young Jews to stay within the community, marry in the community, and raise Jewish children.
I submit that gives Latinos, these circles for singles, an unfair advantage, but that's just me. I wanted to...
we do a lot of outreach with Latinos, so it's okay.
I wanted to ask about anti-Semitism. It's a problem that in Europe has been a very big issue on the Jewish radar. We all know the negative aspects. I think that there have been some silver linings. It has coalesced in a sense of Jewish identity, and it has kept defined borders for certain communities. It has strengthened Jewish identity. It's just something you observe when you walk around in the French banlieue. Now we're seeing a rise in hate crimes in the U.S. Do you think that will have, Mr. Hoenlein, similar effect?
It is having a similar effect. We do have a sharp increase. I saw the CST report, and I think it's very serious, but I think it's a worldwide phenomenon. We have a pandemic of anti-Semitism, but it also comes in the context of a rise of general racial intolerance and sensitivities and heightened sense of conflict that permeates much of society, and that is fertile ground where anti-Semites can function. Part of the problem is that anti-Semitism has not been given its due. We have legislation pending in Congress. It has not passed the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. I think we need to set more standards. We have been too tolerant of anti-Semitism. Islamophobia gets a lot of play, but in fact, Jews are much more likely to be a victim of a racist attack than a Muslim in America, more than double as likely. And the latest statistics, I think, will show it even more. So we have to adopt a policy of zero tolerance. That means that on campuses we cannot accept that Jewish students feel unsafe or are subjected to harassment, and you don't have the actions taken that would be true if it were a racist or other kind of attack. That means the communities have to play a greater role. We have to get university administrations, the faculty, alumni, donors, everybody involved, so that every Jewish student feels safe. Campus is particularly significant place of anti-Semitic manifestation.
Let's circle back to that in a moment, but my question was about the future of Jewish communities, the future of diaspora. How is this?
I don't want communities to be built on a negative, on anti-Semitism. I believe Jewish communities should be built on positives. I think that we have to, that's why I'm saying to you, we have to fight anti-Semitism. We cannot tolerate it. It's a cancer that metastasizes when allowed to grow and not be responded to. And I think a test of society is not whether it has haters. Every society has haters. The test is how do law enforcement, how do people in authority deal with that? And we, as a community, have to be more stringent. We have organizations modeled on CST. We started in America. They are reporting record numbers of incidents being reported to them. And I don't mean just the calls to the JCCs and some of the other things that have been happening, the harassment stuff. I'm talking about physical assaults that are increasing in great numbers in the United States. There is a general tension in the United States, and I think the election exacerbated that to some degree and continues to be a source of tension in society. And we saw the unleashing of forces in this election, both on the left and the extreme right. And when extremes go far enough, they meet. So the extreme of the Democratic left and the extreme of the Republican right looked awful much alike in the end. And both manifested anti-Israel attitudes and some anti-Semitic attitudes. And it really is the responsibility of all of us and the parties themselves to root it out, to address it, too often our concerns are taken for granted. Jews have made it, so we're not really, the attacks on Jews are not considered in the same way as you would consider other groups.
We'll get back to that in a second. Professor Lipstadt, one expression of anti-Semitism in Europe, which some watchdogs count as an anti-Semitic incident, is Holocaust denial. Now, it's undoubtedly offensive to a great many people in Europe and beyond, where it's legal, But what are the long-term effects of Holocaust denial on the strength of Jewish communities, if any?
I want to lower this a little, flip it around a little bit and say that too loud. I think you're looking at it backwards. Holocaust denial is a manifestation of anti-Semitism and often of racism as well. So it's not what's the long-term effect of Holocaust denial on the community, but Holocaust denial is an expression of anti-Semitism. And you have, and I coined the term, it's come into general usage, of the difference between hardcore and softcore Holocaust denial. Hardcore Holocaust denial is the kind of thing I faced in the courtroom when I had to defend myself for libel charges, and facing someone who said there were no gas chambers, there were no plans to kill the Jews, that all this is a myth. That's hardcore denial. And though it was a very long and arduous battle, and as depicted in the movie Denial, even longer and harder than is depicted in the movie Denial, it's almost an easier one to fight because it's quite specific and you can bring historical information to negate it. Softcore denial is much, as a term I use, squishier. And the place it actually started in great extent was in the Soviet Union, not the former Soviet, but the Soviet Union. When you went to the Soviet Union, those of us who went when it was still the Soviet Union, my first trip was in 1972, where you went even to Jewish cemeteries, and there'd be a fraternal grave, a mass grave there, which would mention, here are buried Ukrainians and Belarusian and Russians, but no mention of Jews, or you Babi Yar, the famous of the Holocaust. And it started with the Soviets, and the Soviets were very good at it, so that the left has picked this up in a very extreme fashion. Of the Holocaust, which is a complete myth. There weren't 11 million victims of the Holocaust. The United States Holocaust Museum now guesstimates, because we could never have a precise estimate, that there were 20 to 20 million civilian deaths under Holocaust and Nazi persecution. But when we talk about the Holocaust, we're talking about the attempt to wipe out the Jewish people. It's not all the bad things the Germans did. But the Holocaust itself is defined as the attempt by the Germans roads, etc., etc. So that if you say I'm talking about the 6 million Jews, I get this all the time every time I'm on the radio and television. That's been a lot lately. Why don't you talk about the 5 million non-Jewish victims? That number 5 million or 11 million total victims is a canard. It's fraud. It doesn't exist. It was made up by Simon Wiesenthal. I've written about it. Yehuda Bauer, who actually confronted Wiesenthal about it, has written about it. Wiesenthal made it up because he thought the only way to get non-Jews interested in the Holocaust was to present a number that wasn't quite as large as the Jewish number, but was quite significant. He lied, and he told Yehuda Bauer, and Yisrael Gutman, two of the historians he admired, told him to stop it, but by then it was too late. It has legs. So what happens is that, as with so much of anti-Semitism, and Malcolm knows this so well, as does Jonathan, where it's flipped around, and there's criticism of Jews for only talking about the Jewish victims. You aren't being inclusive. Now, irony of irony, and Malcolm alluded to this as well, where the extreme right and the extreme left often meet, and it's on anti-Semitism. We saw this de-Judaization, this stripping the Jewish identity of the Holocaust from no place less than the White House, where it is surmised this statement came from someone with his roots in the Soviet Union who had that perspective. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But not only was it a de-Judaization in the statement, but then you had 3 levels afterwards. Someone gave them a shovel, and they kept digging themselves deeper and deeper into into that pit, but they, of course, won't admit this, with Hope Hicks, one of the spokespeople, director of communications, I think it is, saying, we're trying to be inclusive. So those of you who want to talk about the Holocaust as a Jewish suffering, where 1 out of every 3 Jews are killed, you're being exclusive. Then the next thing was Reince Priebus saying that, when he's given 3 or 4 times to retract this statement. Well, shouldn't you have mentioned Jews? No. It was a sad thing that happened to everybody. The Jewish identity of the Holocaust is taken away. It's a form of Holocaust denial because it denies what happened to the Jews. And then you had subsequent statements where the press secretary of the White House said President Trump should be given credit for having made reference to this. Now, what that's saying is when I talk about the Holocaust, I'm doing the Jews a favor, as opposed to the Holocaust is a lesson to all of humanity. That's a form of Holocaust and all. That's much more dangerous.
2 follow-up questions. I still get a sense that we're inside an academic debate.
No.
And I want to understand the real-life consequences of it. And the other one, how can we complain when a Jewish activist is behind this myth, and when
What Jewish activists?
And when
creating
when the IDF in its official statements also uses the
IDF can be stupid, and it was.
But this is not about.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think the IDF statement was stupid.
This is about the Yad Vashem flaccidity and not confronting this and not.
Well, that you have to talk to Yad Vashem. I've confronted it pretty strongly. I think it is problematic. I think sometimes Jews do it not thinking it through. Wiesenthal's contribution in terms of being a Nazi hunter and bringing the Holocaust to attention of the world cannot be diminished in any respect. But this is a bad legacy. This is a very bad and very dangerous legacy. And with that kind of thing, and the Soviet Union, the roots, the roots of it having this on the left, and of course the left picking it up. If you say, well, this from Jeremy Corbyn and Labour Party people. If you mention the Holocaust or the former mayor of London, if you mention the Holocaust, that's just a way of deflecting attention from Israel. In other words, the Holocaust becomes a cudgel with which to beat up on Jews. To some degree, it's an academic debate, but academic debates, they can be very arcane, and how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, but they can also have legs, and I think this one has legs because of its connection to anti-Semitism.
I want to ask a question to the whole panel. Mr. Hoenlein, you mentioned a few tools to combat the radicalization, the populism, the trends that we're seeing now today that are causing so much concern throughout the Western world. But much of so what kind of new solutions, what out-of-the-box ideas do we have that we haven't tried yet? Because it seems like the response has been to double down.
Look, I think the lesson of history is that it's not what our enemies do, it's what we do or fail to do. That it's we who raise the bar when we say we can live with it. We read it in the story of the Exodus just now, this week in the Torah, where the Jews said, more bricks, less straw, more restrictions, and they kept saying we can live with it until they said no more. And it said God took us out mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, from under the oppression, and the commentators say no, it means under savlanut, from the patience with it, that we kept tolerating it. Jews in Germany kept saying, they saw more restrictions. Those who were wise saw the signs. Others said, okay, how much worse can it be? They'll never let him do it. Even the front page of the New York Times said, von Ribbentrop will never let Hitler, after his election, will never let him implement these racist policies. So it's we who raise the bar on it. Martin Luther King said, we'll not be judged by the attacks of our enemies, but by the silence of our friends. We, as a community, have to make a determination about how we invest in this, how we deal with it, and the level of commitment that we will really apply. Statistics are a useful guide, and the U.S. statistics that will come out will show sharp increases on campus, off campus. We have to learn both from how our enemies do stuff and how we do it. I think one is positive Jewish identity. Look, there's more learning today. There are more Jewish books published today. I mean, we can look at the bleak side, but there's tremendous creativity and dynamic Jewish growth that is taking place. And look how many people study the Daf Yomi, the Talmud, who are not Orthodox and who belong in law firms having the Daf Yomi. And there are so many things that we could cite that are positive, and we should not lose sight of them as we deal with some of these realities. So number one, I think that we have to build coalitions. We are working on it, for instance, in the Hispanic community, other communities, where we're finding great responsiveness and people who seek to identify with this. And many of them are, by the way, identifying with their Jewish roots. And I spoke at one event, and I said, I know from many Hispanics, there were 1,500 Hispanic leaders, and they say that they clean the houses Friday afternoon, don't know why, and that they have the heritage of different things. And all of them were yelling, that's us, that's us. They want to identify. We have, cardiac Jews, and we have gastronomic Jews. Now we're going to have DNA Jews. Once all these testing go out, everybody's going to find out. A quarter of the people in South America have Jewish DNA. People in Mexico are going to have Jewish DNA. It's not. We're talking about the scientists now, and so I think that we have very serious issues to confront. One of the things that scares me very much is the return of ISIS fighters, who are going to be trained killers with targets, Jewish and non-Jewish, which I think are going to strain our resources and can create havoc everywhere in the world because they're traveling with passports. So there are all sorts of new dynamics that are taking place today that require us to work together with law enforcement. But the community itself, I honestly believe that the only one who can defeat the Jews are the Jews. And that the internal fighting, the divisiveness we see in our communities is the greatest toll that can be taken. That when Jews fight Jews, we lose. When Jews are united, that was the one precondition to every miracle that happened to the Jewish people was Achdut, Jewish unity. From the standing together at Mount Sinai to the rescue of Russian Jews and Ethiopian Jews and Syrian Jews, when we put aside our differences and acted in a united, coherent way. And I think that's the test today, is how we bring people together, these forces that were unleashed in Brexit, in our election, and other things. As I said, the rise of extremist parties all over the world, it's a global phenomenon. It's a global pandemic, I think, that will test us in many respects. And many of the old theories, the melting pot theories, are going down the tubes. But they're not being manifestations. We have to look at it in every way that it appears and confront it and not be afraid. There really has to be a campaign. We're not going to tolerate it. And by the way, when Jews speak up assertively, the rest of the world will follow.
Let me unpack a couple of ideas there. The first is we Jews cope very well with hate. It does make us more united. What we can't cope with is love. And the truth is, for all the challenges that we have in the United Kingdom, and I think the same is true, maybe even true in the United States, our communities exist in very, very benign environments. It would be pretty hard to encounter direct anti-Semitism, and I suspect you will find it just as hard, and maybe even harder, to find an American Jew who's ever encountered direct anti-Semitism. That does not mean we should be complacent. So the second idea is, of course, we have to fight it with the tools that we've used before. Anti-racist legislation, public speaking out, forming alliances, getting political leaders on our side. And those matters will have to continue. Fighting BDS, absolutely, probably more virulent on American campuses at the moment than on British campuses.
Yeah.
More.
No. That's a myth. That's a complete myth. I make my life on both campuses. Okay. It's a complete myth.
I will stand by what I said, but it's
wrong.
Not enough time to give you statistics.
It's just wrong. It doesn't. I can give you all the statistics. I live there. I have lived on American campuses for 40 years. I come to British campuses. It's just wrong.
I can give you the facts and figures, and I will.
And
I
they're
can
wrong.
Take issue with it. The fact is, we needn't fall out over this. The truth is, BDS has failed, but is poisoned the atmosphere, and that is a serious matter which we should all be concerned with. But you asked, I think, Kanan, in your question about new ideas, so let me give you a couple of experiences we have from the United Kingdom. The first, I think it is essential for there to be a recognised definition of what is anti-Semitism that we can by prosecutions rigorous.
I want to buttress what both Malcolm and Jonathan said in terms of coalitions. I think it's crucial. I have had Jews say to me, I chair the Anti-Semitism and Extremism, state-sponsored Holocaust Denial Anti-Semitism Committee for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I have had people say to me, well, I'm only interested in anti-Semitism. Racism is bad and homophobia is bad, but anti-Semitism is really what interests me. Well, first of all, I think from a moral and ethical point of view, that's wrong. But set that aside, because that's a value judgment. Speaking strategically, and I think both Jonathan and Malcolm alluded or spoke directly to this, we have to be willing to build coalitions. We need people who will be with us, and we must be with them. And that includes the Muslim community, whether from Asia or whether from the Middle East. We must try to reach out to the more moderate elements there. Even in some of our books, the more moderate elements are still pretty extreme. And again, as you said, not in order to make peace in the Middle East, because that's talking at each other and it never quite works. And I think often they think, we'll let you Jews change, and it's not a even playing field at all. But certainly to have that coalition, if only to sensitize some within those community to anti-Semitism, which has become almost a cornerstone of much of Muslim identity. Supporter of a very important magazine, And he said to me, he and his wife have a couple who's their closest friends, a Muslim couple, very secularized, very integrated into the general Belgian community. But anti-Semitism is just something that's BDS who have adopted it, who are not necessarily anti-Semites. Some of them can't even find Israel on the map, but that's beside the point. They just see, well, this is a good way of bringing around the state. It worked. I'm told it worked with South Africa, because to them that's the Dark Ages. This is something that will work in terms of the Middle East. I think we have to be we can't fight the big donors to come and say, don't do this, if you do this, we're going to withdraw our gifts, and so you've just confirmed for them. It won't work. It will outlaw each time, even when BDS loses, particularly by an university administrative act, it wins in the long run. It's a much harder fight. The legal fighting is an easy thing. Definitions of anti-Semitism, I'm writing a book on this right now. I think the best definition I've heard of anti-Semitism is Isaiah Berlin, the great philosopher. What is not. It's a very dangerous path to go down when you have them deciding, well, this works and this doesn't work, and we lobbied them, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's problematic. The final point, and I know we're running low on time, the final point I want to make is we also have to be very careful about calling something anti-Semitism and calling it or citing the Holocaust. Look, I spend my whole life fighting Holocaust deniers. I've devoted probably more time than most people who walk the face of the earth in fighting deniers. It turned out to a victory, it turned out a movie, but I can tell you there were a lot of years that we were very far from that. And there was a lot at stake, and I was very lucky. I had the support of the Jewish community. I had the support of wonderful lawyers. I really was blessed in that sense. But I think we have to be very careful. Because if we call something anti-Semitism when it's not, when we call criticism of Israel, does not have to be anti-Semitic. Criticism of Israel can be just criticism of Israel, and sometimes it can also be virulent anti-Semitism. We've got to know the difference. I'll tell you why. Again, I'm not talking morally or ethically, strategically. If you know the story of Chicken Little, who was always yelling, the sky is falling. If we keep yelling, the sky is falling, when it's really falling, they won't pay attention. When the EU had a decision to brand, I think it was products from just the West Bank with a mark, and a leader of the state of Israel said, oh, we Jews know how it is when Europeans mark Jews and Jewish matters, alluding, of course, to the Yellow Star. That was outrageous. You can be against the marking of things from the West Bank, but you don't cite the Holocaust. When we're told that the Mufti of Jerusalem taught Hitler about how to kill Jews, the Mufti would have been happy to kill Jews had Rommel not stood, had the British forces not been able to push back Rommel in Egypt, and had the Germans gotten to Palestine. The Mufti would have been, with great enthusiasm, lined up to destroy the Shuv.
I want to open the floor to questions. So maybe we
So, you know, but it wasn't, the Mufti didn't teach, Hitler didn't need the Mufti to teach him that.
Mr. Hoenlein, you had one remark. Can you keep it short so we can...
No. First of all, I agree with most everything that was just said, but I don't agree about the legislative approaches not having impact. We have legislation in 14 states against BDS. It is impactful. It has stopped companies from doing business, and it applies to Iran sanctions, applies to other stuff too as well, where there is an appropriate role. It is not a one-size-fits-all. I think that is the point really that you're making, and that I agree with. We have a lawfare project. In 1 week, we shut down Kuwait Airlines because they refused to allow people
That's
with
different.
Israel.
I'm talking about
I'm going to come to that. And we have lawyers in lawfare projects, hundreds, 400 across the United States, half of them non-Jews who do pro bono work to defend Jewish students on campuses. And they're available to them whenever they need it. And that proves to be a very viable threat because no university wants to get hauled into court and to start fighting. On the question of whether people experience anti-Semitism, Frank Luntz, who's called America's pollster, had 150 Jewish students in a room. And he asked them from all campuses across the country, while they were waiting to have a video about something else, he said, how many of you have experienced anti-Semitism? 150 hands went up. He said, no, how many of you personally experienced anti-Semitism? 150 hands went up. So young people on campuses today, who are certainly those who are more visibly active, have personally experienced anti-Semitism. And our statistics and our show that is a real concern. And I do think that there has to be a balance when you legislate. You have to know when to apply it, when not to apply it. The same thing comes to definitions. I think getting the State Department's definition on anti-Semitism or the international definition is critical because it gives a tool to people who want to do it. I just want to say there's one other aspect, and that is we have a global campaign against the Jewish people. We saw it in UNESCO. This is an effort to deny Jewish history, to deny Jewish religion, to deny the Jewish people. And if we don't treat that, and that gives legitimacy then to all of those people you're dealing with and that we mentioned, because here you have the United Nations saying the Temple Mount didn't exist, the Kautal is, and all of these things are not relevant. And people say, shmum, it doesn't matter. It does matter because we're already seeing how it translates down into the grassroots and communities. And they use this as justification. They say, what are you talking about? Look at the UNESCO resolution, like Zionism, racism. And somebody said, why do you fight? I said, did you fight Zionism, racism?
That's right, exactly.
They say, yes.
Absolutely right.
And they say, so why not this?
Go.
Okay.
Audience a chance to ask questions.
Time you can ask later.
Yeah.
I want to sum up some of the things we've heard. New tools, old tools, but I think the scarlet line that runs through this is that we cannot go at it alone, and that new alliances, if not new tools, are definitely necessary.
But first, internal alliances. First, the Jews have to be united. Then we could talk about external. If we're not united internally, we're not going to be able to build externally.
Any questions? Yeah,
Malcolm, I just want to correct you that I think that what we've lost is not the melting pot, but pluralism. And that's very important because we don't have it in the Jewish community either, and that's a value that really needs to be resurrected. And here's the point I want to make is that I agree with you. I agree with the need to be vigilant in fighting anti-Semitism. What we're facing, I think, is much more severe and more serious, and we don't talk about it. The Jews, the reason that we have a crisis is not because people hate us. The reason that Jewish students don't support Israel is not because of BDS. The reason Jewish students don't support Israel is because they don't want to be Jewish. They don't care about being Jewish. It's not really a value to them any longer, and we don't address this at all because we always get caught up in the conversation, and the reporters love this because they push the conversation. I'm sorry, I don't mean to attack the media, but I think
Go right ahead.
out of this. The real issue is Judaism and the lack of Jewishness, the lack of Jewish literacy. It's widespread, it's universal, number one. Number two, we've taught our Jewish students that universalism is the highest value of Judaism. It's not. They actually think that they are very good, that they love being Jewish, they are proud of being Jewish, all the data says that, and everybody loves us. We are the highest and most beloved group in America, the Jews. You talk about intermarriage. The reason there's high intermarriage rates is because they love us, they want to marry us, and we have all that data. So I'd like to know, what are we doing for the real issue, which is the decline of Jewishness and the desire to be Jewish among young people all over the world, Jewish all over the world. Aside from Limmud.
I think Mr. Arkush has a has a point to make about how to consolidate Jewish identity here in the UK?
Well, the UK is different from the US in this respect. We have a smaller community grouped round the principal population centres, essentially of London, Manchester, Leeds. And geographically, we're closer to Israel, and that makes a big difference. We have low-cost airlines flying the route. So, very large number, about 65% plus, of young British Jews are taken to Israel at the age of 16 with schools or with youth groups. Today, for almost all of them, that is not their first trip to Israel. For a significant minority, their parents already own apartments in Israel. If anything, it's a problem because they go to Israel too often and they're bored with it. So that's that. We have a significant number of opportunities for gap years in Israel. The number's gone down this year because of financial the costs of it. But our community is a very, very Zionist community. 65% of our children go to Jewish schools, where Israel as a value is promoted. So I think we have a community that does unite around Israel as well as divide around Israeli politics. But I think for our young people, estrangement from Israel is not as significant a problem as it is for the United States. But I'm not in any sense complacent.
And there's been a revolutionary...
I got another session to go.
We are 3 minutes over.
Okay.
We get paid overtime.
Look, Russians acting like Yekim. It's a good thing.
Never.
Thank you very much.